Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and this is another special bonus episode of the podcast. On this special episode, I will be giving my non-spoiler thoughts on the latest MCU show, Ironheart. I have seen all 6 episodes, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and feelings without ruining any of the twists, reveals, cameos that there may be. That episode will debut next week, so make sure you're following on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss it. Let's jump into my spoiler-free thoughts on Ironheart.
About these heists? We Ocean's 11 or The Sopranos?
What's the difference?
I'm only doing this because I have to. Not because I'm a bad person.
You're joking, right? Everyone you're talking about is a criminal, including you.
No, I'm not. I'm an engineer. What I'm building is
Important?
iconic.
Before getting started on my Ironheart non-spoiler thoughts, one thing I wanted to address is that I'm sure people are aware I made a tier list of all of the Phase 5 projects in the MCU, and I left off Ironheart. It has come to my attention that Ironheart is actually the conclusion of Phase 5 and not an entry point into Phase 6, so I'm going to adjust that later and add it onto the tier list once the series has concluded, and I will share the final Phase 5 tier list in a couple weeks. So make sure you're following on socials so you don't miss that. Ironheart is a lot of fun. You can see my social media thoughts on the Film Realists and everything. And the release window in particular is something that I find particularly interesting because we've had shows that have been given all at once releases. For the most part, it has been weekly if you go through the Phase 4 and the Phase 5 shows. The only one to get dropped all at once was Echo, and then Daredevil Born Again was sets of episodes over essentially a month and a half. And Ironheart dropping them the way that they do will best serve the viewing audience. I had the opportunity to watch them pretty much all at once, and the continuing story over the whole season is really compelling. I think it ramps up in terms of tension and all of the elements introduced. Riri Williams, interesting to Black Panther's history because she was brought in Wakanda Forever, which of course was written by Ryan Coogler, who is a producer on Ironheart. And Black Panther, his introduction into the MCU was also in a similar vein where he was brought into Civil War to be a part of that story, to then open up Wakanda as a whole in his own film series. And Black Panther 3 has been in the news a lot because, of course, Ryan Coogler is doing press for Ironheart. What we get from Dominique Thorne as Riri Williams in this season is incredible. She is so compelling as an actress, and what the writers are able to do with Riri and her experience in Chicago, this stuff is in the trailers, this is after MIT, and the consequences of the choices that she's made as an adult have negatively affected her life and potentially where her future's going to go. And it's her home life and her history in Chicago that really motivates what she winds up doing. And I really enjoy seeing a lead character who has flaws, and they're not afraid to show us them. It's been a criticism that I've said and seen shared by others that a lot of the Disney Plus shows, specifically within Star Wars and Marvel, hide things from you deliberately. And don't get me wrong, Ironheart still does that, but the methodology in which things are revealed to you as an audience within Ironheart serve the story most effectively, and they are included at probably the best time. You could rework it in theory to make it less interesting by not hiding things, but showing us Riri Williams is a character with these flaws. She has tragedy in her life, and it has affected the decisions she's made and why she does what she does. Her impact in the MCU and her relationships that she's made, there have been consequences of those things. And for Riri's choices and the reason she does what she do sit with her personally, but those affect all the people around her. And I like seeing a cohesive cast with relationships that have history, and we get an opportunity to explore that. this is still an awesome MCU show. And the way that Ironheart is such a reward for longtime Marvel fans was something, I mean, it will be, because by the time you're listening to this, you will have seen the first 3. I found that so rewarding, where so many elements of the dawn of the MCU are baked into that original Iron Man film. Ironheart as a character wants to build on that legacy, and Riri has her reasons for using her genius intellect as an engineer to create a iron suit, because she feels it's the best use of her abilities and what she could do to make the future brighter and better for those around her. But connecting that to the MCU, obviously there is a history with people in iron suits. And the way that that history is reflected in a modern sensibility, as well as, of course, you would be remiss without addressing a lot of the cultural stuff. And Riri's place in the world is substantially different than Robert Downey Jr.'s was as Tony Stark. And seeing the aftermath of how those films have affected the world around you is really cool. And another element, and this was in the trailer, so I feel confident in saying this stuff, and we know some context from the comics with certain characters, that bringing in these ideas of technology and magic into one particular property in the MCU's very cool. Just seeing the idea of glyphs interacting with an iron suit is unlike anything we've seen before. Of course, we've had movies and a television show focusing on the magical aspects of the MCU with WandaVision, as well as the 2 Doctor Strange films and his appearances in other MCU projects. And of course, we've had the tech side of it, but even in Black Panther, which has such a rich religious and cultural history with the way they deal with Vast and Vibranium and their use of technology, there hasn't been a techno-magic avenue into the MCU to tell that story. And choosing to do that here with the Hood, who is the nefarious antagonist in the show, and Riri's understanding being so binary in terms of technology and the eyes that she has on her with what her job is within the organization she's working with, and the morality of the choices because of consequences is something the show deals with. The fact that there are so many concepts brought into this show about the morality of crime, the less fortunate, as well as obviously where you sit in society, makes for this to be a much more in-depth show and less disposable than perhaps some of the other MCU shows may have been. And what I also appreciate at the same time, that even though this is 6 hours in length, it maybe winds up being slightly shorter, with an average being about 45 minutes in episode length. It doesn't need to be this grandiose world-ending conflict. This definitely fits more in the realm of something like Hawkeye, as opposed to Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Loki, or even Miss Marvel to some degree, because I would say the technological advancements and the use of magic are much more grandiose than something like a high school being destroyed in Miss Marvel. And coming off of something like Agatha All Along, which I did review on the podcast, it's not something that I particularly enjoyed. Having the story be much more grounded in the world around Riri in Chicago, not a cataclysmic sky beam or parallel dimensions, using the budget effectively to give us some really awesome looking Ironheart sequences, and the evolution of these characters throughout the show make each of their arcs meaningful. Now, there's a lot I wish I could talk about that's included in this. By the time you're listening to this, you will have seen the first 3 episodes of the show, so I don't mind mentioning those things. But the dynamic that Riri has with the other criminals in this organization and going against big tech and big money puts her in a place where, from a moral standpoint, she still feels that she's on a higher ground, which I really like. The idea that the circumstances of where you are and your lot in life don't necessarily reflect what you may be doing. And that's a really compelling argument, because even though Riri has been given opportunities like going to Wakanda and MIT, she still has made choices that have made those things unsuccessful paths, and where she winds up being and functioning purely as an individual and failing to see the people around her. Again, you can introduce heroes to us and hide all their flaws from us, or give heroes with no flaws. But somebody who is dealing with their own internalized problems or external because of other things happening around them that could potentially be the antagonist they're working with, or the broken relationships that may have been a result of the things you've chosen to do, make Dominic Thorne's performance, as well as the cast around her, specifically her family, feel much more grounded and in a real world sense than somewhere where somebody may have a family, but we don't really get to see a lot of the familial connections. Ant-Man is probably the only show within the MCU where we really do get to see his family, and it's played for a much more comedic sense. WandaVision had her boys who were not actually real, and Falcon the Winter Soldier, we get to see some of his family, but they're of course not the center of the story. Hawkeyes are somewhere completely else. He's dealing with something so he can get back to them. Miss Marvel's probably the most similar, in which they are an essential part of the story, and their development is just as important as Riri's. And the way that each of the characters connect to each other and provide opportunities for different perspective show the functions and the success that you can have when collaborating with your loved ones. And I really dug that. The flavor of this show is so fun and it's interesting. You'll see the evolution of the Ironheart suit, which is something I know people love within the Iron Man world. The tech is constantly evolving. Now, as somebody who didn't necessarily love nanotech, in my opinion, it did make sense for that to be, pun intended, the end game of Tony's suits by the end of his run within the MCU. I really enjoyed this show. I don't think that they've marketed it to us nearly enough. It has such a great blend of all the things that work so well in the MCU. There's been some criticism that the first 3 episodes aren't necessarily as compelling as the last 3, but I found that the show introduced enough of what's happening to start to build in a foundation to where things get insane in the finale. And the way that they use the budget effectively to give us a convincing Ironheart suit more than once, and the suit doesn't need to necessarily just be put to the side, is something I really appreciated from it. It's part of the fabric of what makes Riri so special. And as we saw in Iron Man 2, people are trying to develop this technology, and she is a kid. I mean, she's not a postgraduate, but a post-secondary age person who has the capabilities of manufacturing these incredible things with real-world objects. We know that Justin Hammer has attempted to do it and clearly obviously hurt people. It would have been really awesome if we saw Justin Hammer later on in the MCU, but of course that's not been the case. I enjoyed this show all the way through. I think each episode just gets better from start to finish. This to me is Disney Plus with Marvel at its best. Now, of course, I absolutely adored Daredevil Born Again, but taking a character that was secondary to the main character in a movie and giving them a show to have an opportunity to fully flesh that out, while at the same time moving pieces forward, because by the end of this series, there is a massive event that I'm really curious to see what the aftermath of that's going to be. Disney Plus and the MCU have kind of given us a mixed bag of television series through these runs of Phase 4 and 5, and it's nice to see that when they focus on a character and what makes them interesting, that you can succeed, as opposed to trying to make each episode feel like a movie. This is one of the few shows in the MCU that actually feels like a cohesive television series, as opposed to 40-minute movies. It wasn't affected by the pandemic. They could add, and there were reshoots to do this, but it feels as if it's a cohesive vision that didn't have to be saved because they were afraid of connecting it to prior elements of the continuity. It's actually on the contrary. As I've already said, this show pays homage and respect to the legacy of the MCU that's been running now for 17 years. That will do it for my non-spoiler thoughts on Ironheart. I thought this was a really entertaining show and shows what the MCU is capable of on streaming. We currently don't have any other announced shows outside of Daredevil Born Again Season 2, so fingers crossed we get to continue to see what they can do on TV, because some characters are suited for this storytelling method as opposed to the feature films. Next week's main episode will be a review of Formula 1. If you haven't yet, follow on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss it. Share, rate, play on Spotify and iTunes. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.